Let's jump in here, shall we?
Sure.
Welcome, everyone, to our MELD sessions #1. It is with great honor to have our first MELD sessions with Dr. Peter Levine. Many of you are very familiar with his work, and we are so excited to learn from him. But all right, before we actually jump into the meat and juice of all this, let's all take a huge deep breath. And as we settle in here, notice what you are sensing in your experience, in your physical experience. And if you're familiar with the somatic world, you probably have a depth of understanding of your somatic awareness, but not maybe just sense what you're sitting on, or perhaps what the air feels like on your skin. And then really gently, with some kindness, sense into your level of safety right now. From a 1 to 5, 1 being you are feeling anxious, maybe you feel frightened or terrified, and 5 being I feel completely safe and okay in my body and in my environment. Where are you on that scale? And perhaps there might be a part of you that goes, well, I'm at home, I'm in my office, I should be a 4 or 5. See if you can let that should step aside and really come into what you're truly and authentically sensing right now. Thank you for that, Francisco. And then I invite you to take another deep breath. And notice if that shifts something in your experience. Maybe you felt your shoulders drop a little bit. Maybe you felt your belly relax. Great. So it is with great honor and privilege to first introduce Dr. Peter Levine. He is the developer of Somatic Experiencing. He is a naturalistic and neurobiological. Somatic Experiencing is a naturalistic and neurobiological approach to healing trauma, which he has developed over the past 50 years. He holds a doctorate in Biophysics from UC Berkeley and a doctorate in psychology from Antioch University. He's the founder and president of Ergos Institute for Somatic Education, dedicated to community outreach and post-advanced somatic experiencing training, and the founder and advisor for Somatic Experiencing International. He has taught at Cal Berkeley, Mills College, Antioch University, the California Institute of Integral Studies, and the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute. His work has been taught to over 30,000 therapists in over 42 countries. And he is the best-selling author of books on trauma, including Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma, which has been published in over 29 languages. In an unspoken voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness, Trauma and Memory, Brain and Body in a Search for the Living Past. And his latest book, which you can see right behind him, An Autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey. Welcome, Dr. Peter Levine. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, good to be with you. Good to be with you. And to all of you from all different places in the world, maybe even in the known universe. Yeah.
Thank you. And before we get into the conversation here, Peter, I just want to really quickly introduce Owen Marcus. He is my mentor, a man that I look up to and who have been looking up to these last few years. He is the creator of the Sandpoint Men's Group, which has over hundreds of men alumni who have gone through his programs. He also helped found Everyman, and today he is the co-founder of MELD, Men's Emotional Leadership Development. I have a really personal relationship with Owen, and he often talks about starting this work because he wanted to first develop his own emotional intelligence. And so this first started as, in some ways, an experiment and for him to be more embodied in his life. But now he sits as one of the leaders in the men's wellness and men's work spaces. He is the author of Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, 9 Steps to Releasing the Remarkable Man Within You. He's a TEDx alum and has been featured in the New York Times, Men's Health, and ABC News Live. And again, he is the co-founder here at MELD, Men's Emotional Leadership Development. And just really quickly, my name is Mike Segun. I'm moderating this conversation. I'm a MELD co-founder, but also a Somatic Experiencing student. I'm in my final year, and I'm a coach, teacher, and facilitator. And welcome, everyone. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Mo, and thank you for taking this time with us.
Sure. Well, just tell me where you'd like me to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to start actually first by talking about your relationship with Owen. And Owen, you're going to kick this off here. The roots of the work that we're doing here at MELD comes from Peter's work. We have studied his work, all the years of his research. We've really taken his somatic approach into the way that we work with men. And so, Owen, can you just quickly start to share your story and how your friendship.
Thanks, Mike.
In progress.
I first met Peter, I think it was like in 1980. You did a presentation for the Rolf Institute, and I was sitting in the back of the room, and you were explaining your work. And then you explained something I'd never heard before, which was the whole freeze response. And it was one of those times in my life that I got a cold chill running through my body, because I'd had enough training and experience to know that something was missing, but I didn't know what it was. But when you explained it, I mean, I just knew this is what I've been looking for. This is what I've been missing in all my education and training. And that was 1980, or maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And from then on, it became a core of my work in some form or another, be it Rolfing, and then 30 years ago with men's work. And it really guided me into using the body to essentially melt that freeze and get first myself, as Mike said, connected to my own experience, and help now other men do the same and do it through the path of the body, rather than what we've been traditionally trained to do. And I want to honor Peter for someone that I've known for all these years and certainly followed as a courageous man who, when we started off, or when you started off, what you were suggesting was very fringe.
It was very fringe and very radical.
Yeah, very radical. And people just put it down, and they put you down. And
right.
That would upset me. But your courage and tenacity and your brilliance, you just stuck with it. And now your work is the sine qua non of psychological work. It's the work that everyone wants to study. It's the work that other programs are based on. And really, our program in many ways is based on. So we owe a lot to you, Peter, for your courage and tenacity to stick with this, and all the work that you've done directly and indirectly to help people. And there's men in our program and in our group in Sandpoint that have credited this work to saving their lives. And they said if they weren't in our program, they would have killed themselves.
Wow.
And that means that, the work that you've trained me in, and I've been able to train these other men in, has literally saved lives. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's very touching, and I really appreciate it. In the book that you mentioned, which just came out last week, An Autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey, I really talked the backstory about what happened to me in my life, my traumas and other experiences, beatific often. But to really go to the backstory, really the truth of how I developed this from healing my own wounds. The word trauma from Greek actually means wound, injury or wounds. And the thing about that is that wounds can heal. And we just have to have the right tools. I have a saying, without tools, trauma rules. But with the right tools, we can not only meet trauma, but we can transform trauma, and very often open into very deep feelings of awe, which might be more seen as spiritual. But I am convinced there is a welded unity between trauma transformation and spirituality. And again, Yeah, and at the time, I didn't dare talk about things like that, and that's what the autobiography allowed me to do, is to talk about the things that I had not been able to talk about for the past 50 years.
So, Peter, Owen was just saying, like in the 80s, that somatic work was very fringe. It was like
Yeah.
what people weren't talking about, they were actually rejecting it. How
Mhm.
did you figure out the body was the way to healing?
Well, when I really started to develop somatic experiencing in the late 60s, in the early 70s, I was fortunate to not know, because the definition of trauma as PTSD was still like 12, 13 years in the future. And so I didn't know that trauma was supposedly a brain disorder, maybe even a brain disease that could at best be managed by helping people change their negative thoughts and using different medications. And so I was really on a very different path. I'm not saying that that's all wrong, that is in some cases important. But but I realized that when we experience threat or danger, our body responds in very clear, specific ways. You know, so for example, if we were hit as a child, punished or even hit emotionally, our shoulders might be bracing against being hit. So the shoulders would be coming up like this. And often people have, for example, present not with flashbacks, but with chronic pain. And so a typical area of chronic pain, there are several, is in the shoulders. And so what I might have people do, and you're welcome, everybody in the group, to practice this just a little bit. So if you feel some pain in your shoulders or some tension, what do you think that tension might want to do if it actually increased? And so most people will report their shoulders go up. So I said, okay, so now do that very slowly, very, very slowly, just lifting your shoulders, contracting it just the smallest amount, and then let it go. And then just notice what happens in your body, sensations, feelings, thoughts, images, pictures, memories that come up even from a simple exercise like this. Yeah. So again, another example of this would be, say you just go out of your door in the morning and you see somebody's been hit by a car and they're laying on the ground, and your guts go, ugh. And if you walk out and see they're really badly hurt, that twisting becomes even more yuck, because our brains are set to register threat, danger, or especially injury. In working with military people over the years, that much more trauma happened when they saw somebody being injured or killed rather than they were injured themselves. So it's again how we're programmed. So the brain stem, the primitive brain, recognizes that and sends a signal to the body, whether it's shoulders like this or twisted guts. And then that when that becomes habitual, becomes chronic, it's now sending messages to the brain that says the threat is still there, the injury is still there. And in a way, that's how we work with trauma, not so much with the content, although often content comes up, but really how our bodies have responded to threat, particularly to overwhelming threat.
Mhm.
Mm, mm. Do you have anything to add there, Owen?
Yeah, I mean, as you probably know, with so often with men, we've been so disconnected that we have to go slow and get them
Yes.
connected to their bodies. And one of the things I know that you really advocate, and we certainly do, is creating a safe space so they can have these subtle experiences.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
could you just sort of elaborate on how important safety is?
Oh my God, it's so important. Um, I can give you a little bit of my personal story of how I began to find the sense of safety. When about 30 years ago, I had been developing somatic experiencing and it being teaching, it's been taught in many different places. So in a way, that burden was off my shoulders. And but I started to have some symptoms, the troubling sensations, troubling symptoms, and some images that would flash there momentarily. And I realized it was time for me to take a dose of my own medicine. You know, Chiron from Greek mythology, in a more contemporary way, is about the wounded healer. And we all carry our wounds. I'd rather say wounds than trauma, because I mean, again, from the Greek there, it's the same thing. But wounds, it has less of a judgment to it, and less of a diagnosis to it, you know. So so anyhow, I asked one of my students to guide me to see what was underneath these sensations, these symptoms. And one of the things two of the things in somatic experience is we really slow things down so they can be felt. If they come too fast, we can't really feel them. We just react. So we want to, you know, be able to really slow it down. And the other thing is we don't go right into the trauma, to the core of the trauma. And there are approaches, and there are many really good approaches to healing, of course. But one of the approaches that I really don't like is where they have the person relive their traumas over and over again, something called prolonged exposure. I think that can really actually just zap the energy out of people. But anyhow, we have to slow it down, and we don't go right into the center of the trauma. So clearly some trauma was emerging in my body. And then my guide, deftly kind of led me in the direction of these other sensations that I felt, again, somewhere in my body, which were sensations, again, of goodness. Something was right. Anyhow, the memory that came up was when I was 4 or 5. My parents snuck into my bedroom, must have been at night or in the morning, early in the morning, and they laid tracks, model train tracks underneath my bed, out into the room, and then back again underneath the bed. So when I awoke to these trains going around the track, and to say I was excited would be an understatement. I was in just joy. I jumped out of bed. I went to the transformer to control the speed. I also was able to, you know, find out how to make the horn toot. So in that moment, I didn't have the words for it, but my body knew that I was cared for, that there were people who cared for me and who loved me. And even though many traumas have occurred before that, but mostly after that, that important memory really allowed me enough relative safety to deal with some of these other really horrific events. So, by the way, this is what I write about, many other things, of course, also in the autobiography of trauma. So, my guide noticed a slight shuffling of my feet, and she gently brought my attention to it and had me slow it down. And then I had this, again, another positive memory. There was a park across the street from my house, and it was called Reservoir Oval. And I went there many times. And during the time, my family was under extreme threat. And this was, again, not safety, the opposite of safety. And my father was trying to, the district attorney, the DA, was trying to get my father to testify against this mafia don named Johnny Dioguardo, Johnny Dio. And he was as violent, as mean as you can imagine. He was also featured in the Goodfellas, the movie, and the Irishman. You know, and when people wanted to really brutally attack somebody, that's who they enlisted. So the DA was trying to get, it's a long story. My father wasn't doing anything bad, but all of these coincidences, he was again made to testify against Johnny Dio. And Johnny Dio said, basically, if you testify, you find your family face down in the East River. And that was, I knew there was profound danger, but I didn't know what was happening at the time. And because my parents never talked about it and never said, this is difficult and it's going to be okay, and that we're going to take care of you. But we knew that something was wrong. We could get that from our parents' body language. But again, nothing was said about it, so we kind of had to stuff it. And I remember even one evening, the mafia would send lawyers to my father to tell him how to testify. And so I remember sneaking out of my bedroom, laying underneath a small table, a telephone table, and just straining to hear what they said. And the little snippets that I get, I realized something was seriously wrong. And it really pulled my legs out from under me, really. And so in this park, rather oval park, I would climb. I first go home and have my milk and cookies, Pepperidge Farm cookies. And then I would go across the street over this big wrought iron fence and down through these bushes to a running track below. And I would run and I would breathe. And I felt my legs starting to come back. So in a way, this was an antidote for having my legs pulled out from under me. Except one time something really terrible happened. And as I climbed over the fence and started going towards the bushes, I saw a group of men all smoking cigarettes with these motorcycle hats. And I realized something was wrong. And I could feel the hair on my back and my neck just stand out. And I knew that it wouldn't work if I went back and tried to climb the fence, because they could easily grab me then. So I ran down to the bushes and somebody grabbed me. I think there were 3 or 4 men, and I was brutally beaten and raped. And working with this and working with those other memories and working with the sensations and letting them move through where they were stuck, I was really able to let that go, to let it be in the past where it belonged. So again, that's something that's I take from my own experience, but I believe there's some funny noises happening. Yeah. That and when I wrote the autobiography, I had actually at the beginning no intention of publishing it. It was really for my own excavation for the memories like what I was just talking about, and how I reacted to them, and how I inhibited my life, and how I reclaimed my life and came back into a live sense in my body. One of the reviewers of the book said that a one man's soul journey from, oh God, what was it? Maybe it's here. From searing pain to joy, from self-hatred to self-love. And in a way, that is my journey. And I really believe that we all have that capacity as we are willing to embody ourselves. It doesn't mean you have some kind of a really violent trauma like I'm describing, but we all have wounds. We've all gotten message, especially men. So I want to kind of get back to that issue. And I'm really glad that you're doing that. Actually, I was in a men's group in 1972 or something like that, 74. And it was an important experience. When I moved, I couldn't continue it, but I really need, men really need to be able to feel and to share that with others so they can communicate it. It's not just having the feeling, but then being able to articulate the feeling in words. So that's kind of the nutshell about my work and about developing somatic experiencing. As I said, this is the backstory of how I developed that from my own healing and my own knowing and my own insights and my own honoring my teachers. One of the chapters is called the four most important women of my life. And they were teachers and also the four most important men in my life. The ones that I learned more from the women teachers was more about sensing and feeling, and of the four men, except for one, it was more about intellect. So kind of again, holding those gifts together, I think supported my development as a person and as a professional and in developing somatic experiencing.
Well, I think you really touched on a key point. I know for me, and I think for a lot of guys, is how we take what we've trained and which is the intellect, and the way of processing, which is intellectual, and melding it with the somatic and emotional.
Yeah.
And we haven't had a model that really allows for that until you developed your model, and then we've sort of adapted it working with men. And I think that's also a key thing of, for us men, we not only need to feel it somatically and feel it emotionally, but we need to speak it. And then we need to have witnesses,
Yes,
which is
absolutely.
the antidote, the antithesis of what we didn't have when we had the trauma.
That's right. Yeah, we need to be witnessed. I wrote in I think it was in an unspoken voice, that trauma is not what happens. It's not just what happens. It's not primarily what happened to us, but rather what we hold inside in the absence of that present empathetic other who was able to reflect our experience. And that triumvirate, the three really need to be held together for our growth and for our evolution.
Yeah, and I think, looking at my trauma and all these other people I've worked with, is that so often we had an experience that was too big for the space that we were in.
Yes.
And that, and what's great about what we can do with these men in these groups and other situations is that, they can have an experience, and the naturalness of men just being themselves and sort of being in that more open space allows that one man to complete his experience in a way that he never could have, when he had that experience of trauma.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. I mean, all I can say is I agree.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that we had is, um, with all your work with men and women, and us being so focused on men, and men so often, at least traditionally, sort of being left behind in terms of the emotional awareness and development curve. What do you see as our men's, biggest challenges in developing this somatic awareness and utilizing those abilities?
Gosh, I mean, I don't know what we could do without it. Without it would just be ideas. There's a saying in Papua New Guinea that, and if knowledge isn't felt in the body, the original statement is that if knowledge isn't felt in the muscles, in the body, then it doesn't exist at all. And I think we've been top heavy. I could say, I'm not sure if this is accurate, but we, when Rene Descartes, and this was in the 1600s, said, "I think, therefore I am." And he really, really spoke an unfortunate truth that was happening in a society. I mean, he's not the one who's, made all that happen, but I think he was reflecting that time. And also at that same time, there was a philosopher named Blaise Pascal, and he actually wrote a letter, apparently, to Descartes, and said something like, "Monsieur Descartes, you screwed things all up." And he said, Blaise Pascal, that the body has its reasons which reason cannot reason.
Mm.
Originally, the heart has its reasons which reason cannot reason. And I think men's work is about opening our hearts. Well, opening all of our feeling centers, our hearts, our genitals, our abdominals, connection with our authentic self or our true self, our primal self. I think this is, you know, again, this is just my read, but and again, you know, my understanding comes from being a heterosexual male, that women have really explored first their feelings and met together in groups. And I think that we as men were kind of left behind in that way. So we're doing a catch up in a way. And I see that as a very positive development, you know, because not just genders, but all people who are in relationship with others. You know, if we don't have access to our body sensations, and all of our feelings actually emerge from our body sensations. You know, in somatic experiencing, there's a map that I developed. It's called S.I.B.A.M, S-I-B-A-M, and it stands for the following. S is sensations, but I'm not talking about external sensations. I'm talking about sensations that come from the body, sometimes now called interoceptive sensation or interoceptive awareness, to bringing those in awareness. Then I are images, and images, it could of course be visual because humans are primarily visible, especially men. And but we also hear sounds, we feel touch. These are all things that are coming originally from outside the body and impact the body. Then B stands for behaviors. I'll come back to that in a little bit. And oh, by the way, the sensations particularly involve visceral sensations, somatic and visceral sensations. So, okay, so after B comes A, which stands for affects or feelings. And it refers to the categorical emotions of Darwin, like anger, fear, sadness, joy, surprise, but also much more subtle feelings that come from the body sensations and then move through us as a felt sense. So, for example, you look at a blade of grass in the morning and it's just got dotted with dew, and you're just touched by the beauty. Or you see a friend that you haven't seen for a while and you're filled with gladness. These are not emotions in the Darwinian sense, but they're feelings that really let us know that we're alive and that we're alive and real. Then the final one is M, which stands for meanings. And when we've been abused or traumatized, we tend to have, no surprise, negative meanings, negative beliefs that we're no good, that we caused all of this to happen, that we feel guilt and shame and so forth. And again, all of those tend to reinforce the negative affects. So then in somatic experiencing, B stands for behaviors, but there are different layers of behaviors. Like, for example, if I'm talking and I'm using my hands to demonstrate something, that's not really spontaneous. It's not completely deliberate, but it is deliberate. Okay? Now, there are ones that are much more subtle. So, for example, our postures, and I don't mean standing up straight, but I mean really the alignment of our spine, because from all of our movements that emerge from preparation, which is what I began to read about in Waking the Tiger, preparation of these motor patterns to move into action. So again, that had to do with those more subtle behaviors. Of course, breath, spontaneous breath is another. And again, it's not about taking a deep breath. It's about allowing the breath to come in through our bodies, to organize in our bodies. And then other behaviors are sounds that we hear, for example, from the viscera. Now, all of those probably the individual is not that aware of, But if they're in a therapy session, then that's what the therapist, essentially trained therapist, is looking for, those behaviors, so they can reflect that back to the client, and then the client is able to use that to reference their sensations and feelings and their meanings and their knowings.
Yeah, S.I.B.A.M has been such a really beautiful model for me when I work with my clients.
Yeah,
And I really love this idea of, our bodies are constantly sending us information, and it's our awareness and our noticing that allows us to notice what's happening so that we can make clear, different decisions in our life,
that's
create
right.
change in our life. Peter, one of my favorite quotes from you is, you said, I think in Waking the Tiger, trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence.
Yeah,
And we work with a lot of men who are stuck in a freeze state. For many
yeah,
of us that are on this call, you're probably familiar with the survival responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. But the guys that come into our programs are stuck in a freeze state where they're
yeah.
not taking action in their life. They're stuck in relationships. They have these maladaptive coping strategies. Can you talk just a little bit about what's happening in our nervous system and our body when we are in that freeze state?
Sure. When I first started to talk about it, in, like you were saying, Owen, in the early 80s, it was something that wasn't known really. I mean, maybe by a few biologists, but there are those, as you briefly mentioned, 4 different kind of ways that we deal with danger and we deal with threat. So one is we mobilize for fight or for flight. And that's a strong action. Again, our body is ready to defend ourselves if need be, or to run, to escape. That's the fight or flight. But what happens if the fight or flight is not successful, or we realize that we're completely overwhelmed? Then our body goes into a state of freeze. And if this becomes chronic, we go into a state of collapse. So freeze, collapse. Yeah? And then finally, there's fawning. The example of that is the Stockholm syndrome. That we befriend the captors, or the people who have had threat over us, so as a way of trying to help neutralize that threat. And yeah, so those are, again, basic ways that the body deals with being injured. Yeah.
Right. And in that freeze state, I'm going to get to you. And in that freeze state, we're basically, it's like, so we don't feel the impact of dying, right? Of like that predator coming and attacking us. And so oftentimes in a freeze state, there's this out of body experience, this dissociation that happens that protects us in a way.
Yeah.
Owen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you taught us that back in 1980 in that hot room in the Rolf Institute that one August afternoon. And what I've come to see is, going back to what you said about these subtle behaviors, getting someone, myself or someone else, connected to those subtle behaviors is sort of the portal to sort of reopen or melt that freeze and allow that physiology to complete,
That's right.
which was the thing I took away from that talk back then, was that physiology is, in that freeze state, is frozen, even though externally that it looks frozen, but internally the body, the nervous system, the endocrine system is still stuck in that aroused state. So yeah, could you just sort of help unpack that?
Sure. Well, again, when we're in that freeze state, that collapse state, we're getting ready to die. And what seems to happen, among other things, is there's a strong release of endorphins, and those are the brain's natural built-in um, uh, pharmacy. And the endorphins really blunt the pain and the terror. Actually, it's kind of a family thing, because my brother is the one who discovered the endorphin-mediated placebo response. And it's a very powerful, and when people are really, they've gone through like mandibular surgery, very painful surgery. If they take a pill, it's a sugar pill, and even if they know it's a sugar pill, actually, and it can be as robust a pain relief as is morphine, which is the gold standard of pain relief. So it's very, very powerful systems. Then also out of the body, that's again a very common response to overwhelming threat. I begin in the book in an unspoken voice with talking about when I was walking across the street and a teenager came at me. There was a big truck, so she didn't see the stop sign, and came at me and hit me at about 25 miles an hour. So I was thrown up in the air, and then although my body responded by protecting my head because the windshield, was cracked, and then again bracing against hitting the pavement. And so I was laying there on the ground, and I wasn't in my body. I was up there somewhere above, looking down at the scene, and in a way feeling sorry, feeling compassion for that self that was injured. And just about that time, again, talk about safety, this woman came by, and there was a crowd of people around me, but this one woman came closer, and she announced herself as a medical doctor, as a pediatrician. Sure, that was really the type of medical profession that I was needing at the time. And she asked me if there's anything that she could do. And I said, please just be with me. So she sat down. She wasn't above because everybody else was above. She sat down with me, and she took my hand in her hand. And in that moment, I came down from being out of my body into my body, and I was able to discharge that shock using somatic experiencing tools. But without that person's aid coming to me and giving me that sense that I had some safety, that I was protected in a way by her, even though I have so many tools, the tools that I've been developing over 40 years, I don't think I could have done that without her presence, without her there, without her connecting with me. And again, that's so important. There's a Motown song. It takes one to stand in the dark alone. It takes two to let the light shine through. And I think that's what we can be for each other. And getting back to the men's group idea, that way we can be together with other men and experience these sensations and feelings and speak about them, maybe feelings that we just thought were too raw to talk about. And again, for me, the autobiography was really about working with these raw sensations, raw feelings. Again, when I first started writing about it, it was not meant to be a book, not meant to be a published book. And I was writing this as a way of kind of excavating my life and the sensations and feelings that have shaped my life. And very, very good friend, Laura, she said, you really need to write this as a book. And I said, no way, it's too vulnerable. And she said, well, really, I hope you think about it, because I'm convinced that the book could help people with their own feelings, with their own sensations, with their own writing their own stories in a way. And so I still couldn't, make that decision. So in a way, I wouldn't say I was frozen, but I was stuck. It was a kind of frozen. I was in a conflict. I really didn't know what to do. And in my life, at different times, when there's something that's unsolved in my heart and my being, a dream will come to me. And in this case, the following dream came. I was standing in front of a field, a large field, and I had in my hands manuscripts. It was typewritten, so obviously it was a manuscript. And I looked to the left, to the right, and I didn't know what to do. Again, I felt stuck, I felt conflicted. So in that moment of indecision, this wind came from behind me and took these pages and just took them into the air, into that open meadow to land where they may. And when I awoke, that dream was so clear, I knew that I was going to write the book. It still wasn't easy, but I knew that that decision had been made from my unconscious. And again, when we connect to our body sense, particularly to our viscera, that's where our intuition comes from, our gut instincts. You know, it's not just a saying, it's a very specific physiological connection.
Peter, I remember you in Unspoken Voice, you also talked about after you were hit by the car, there was you allowed yourself to tremble and shake. That was
Yes,
like part of your discharge. And there was an EMT, I believe it's an EMT, that was like, stop shaking, stay where you are. And because of the knowledge that you knew
right. Do you need a
along,
Valium? Do you need a Valium?
right, exactly. But because you know how what your body needed, but also because you had that doctor next to you who almost gave you permission to be with your body and let your body's wisdom take over,
Exactly.
you didn't develop any PTSD from this. And
That's right.
what I want to get into here is what I'm hearing is that there was a lot of co-regulation that was happening between you and that doctor. There was this sense of safety in that moment for your body to just do what it needed to do. And unfortunately, for many of us growing up, we didn't have parents that knew how to co-regulate with us.
Sure.
And so when we are in quote unquote danger, when we feel we are in danger, we're often told to suppress it, to stuff it down, to put on a different emotion. And that inevitably starts to come into our relationships. And when we come into our partnerships and romantic relationships,
that's right.
Somatic work has really been really beautiful in my marriage with my husband. And I'm just curious, and Owen, I would love to hear your thoughts on this too. But how does emotional safety and co-regulation play a crucial role in the health of a relationship?
Yes. You know, if we were born to parents or caregivers that were in tune with their bodies enough, and they held us, especially when we were upset, and gently rocked us, then they were helping us regulate our nervous system states or distress states, which are physiological. And when we've had this experience, we gradually learn to regulate ourselves. So we move from co-regulation to our own internal regulation. And if we bring that into our relationships, well, that really deepens the intimacy of the relationship. And, you know, I also write about in the book about how I struggled with having intimate relationships where I was able to connect together heart and genitals. And I think, again, that's our task. One of our important tasks, maybe our most important task, is to be able to regulate and to share that sense of regulation with another who also is learning about regulating their physiological states. So to share that together, I think, is the greatest gift we can give both to ourselves and to others.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And sort of the parallel that with what you were saying earlier, Peter, that I know from myself, and I've seen it with other men, that a lot of what stops us is shame.
Yes.
And that's for me, it's sort of like a unique kind of freeze. And so one of the things that we see, you know, in our groups and trainings is that a brave man will share something that he's ashamed about.
Hmm.
But in this setting, rather than being ostracized or made fun of, like we so often are, or traditionally are as
Yep.
men, he's actually honored. And
Hmm.
in that honoring, he goes from feeling less than to greater than, and there is this sense of co-regulation, and he's able to experience what's behind that shame that thwarted the completion of that experience in a prior situation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, shame is the strangulates the soul, the spirit, diminishes the spirit. And it's very powerful in a way. It's one of the most powerful emotions. And it causes us not only to freeze and to collapse. And one of the things that I think men can do, or anybody really can do to move through the grip of shame so we can look at the shame and the shame can be reflected, as you just described, Owen, is that there's a very specific posture. Again, we're talking about B in S.I.B.A.M. And it's like we avert the gaze of another person. So we look away and down, and then we kind of collapse forward from our diaphragm, and we can get stuck there. So in working with this somatically, I might have the person become aware because they might be having a micro movements of shame, and to just have them move into that posture a small amount and then come out. So again, slowly, one small amount at a time, titration, moving into that posture and then coming back out of the posture. And sometimes it's amazing when people do that, are guided to do that. The shame transforms to a sense of pride and openness in the chest, of pride and dignity. And again, I think shame, that's a whole other topic, a whole other subject. But I think shame, especially the toxic shame, happens um, when we are traumatized and abused, and we, not a cognitive belief, but it's an impacting belief that we're responsible for that, that we are at fault. And I think that's a mechanism that children do, because kids are incredibly brilliant in emotional ways usually, and until they're just stymied or stifled. But uh, when we're guided in this way, then the shame loses its, I guess I'm repeating myself, loses its grip, and then we're able to be more at peace with that. Now, what often happens actually in the therapy room is a client starts to come near to their shame. Something comes up. And because of the therapist's unresolved issues around shame, again, this is not cognitive, this is completely bodily, unconscious and bodily. And so they'll deflect the client away from the shame because protecting themselves or protecting themselves from dealing with their own shame. So we have to do that so we can be there again, another way of being there with others. So we're not afraid and shut down when shame does arise, and we can help witness it, just what you're describing, Owen.
Mm. Wonderful. So we're going to actually get to practice some group work and maybe some co-regulation here.
Sure.
Peter, you have an exercise for us.
Yes. Well, I have a few exercises that might be useful. The first one is what I call the self-hug exercise. And when we have these feelings, emotions, sensations, it can seem overwhelming. But when we are able to feel how it is to hold ourselves, and often when people do that, their bodies just in a little while start to gently, slowly move from side to side. And so we're helping the person contain ourselves, to contain these difficult sensations by this holding, by connecting it, well, with that fascia and those muscles, by just really letting them, helping them to regulate, to co-regulate. Now, a deeper way of, well, again, when we're working with the fight or flight, that again has to do with the, that protective response. So again, we can also work with that slowly allowing ourselves, and you can do this with me if you like, to go up a little bit, but then to release and let go, to keeping, yes, having our hands here, and then just feeling that tension, that movement away, and then just letting it go. And just noticing as we do this for any sensations, feelings, thoughts, or memories, to just hold us together, to hold ourselves, to give us some of the holding maybe that we didn't receive, but that we can receive and offer it to ourselves and to others. The guts is this place where our deepest feelings and sensations come from. These are sensations of tingling, vibration, warmth. And there's a nerve that goes, we'll have a little physiology exercise, that goes from the back of the brainstem down through the diaphragm and goes to all of our internal organs. And this nerve, it's the largest nerve in the body. And what is not that well known, and I think Darwin knew this in the 1860s, and when he wrote the book, the emotions, no, well, the emotions of man and animals. Is that, no, it's, I'm not got quite it, don't have it quite right. Anyhow, if I remember it, I'll remind myself. Oh, the expression of emotions in man and animals. And he talked about this nerve, which he called the pneumogastric nerve, that connected the brainstem to our internal organs. We call it again to the pneumogastric nerve, pneumo, lungs, gastric, gastrointestinal system. And he realized, and he wrote about this, that this nerve is responsible for gut wrench and heartbreak. And it was just amazing, amazing, amazing that he knew this. And I think he intuited it, because he also had a lot of what we would call somatization of trauma. And so I can kind of guess that this may have been part of his own healing. Now, what happens if that nerve becomes overactivated? We are experiencing life threat. So our guts twist, and our guts just keep sending them. Oh, important caveat, not caveat, but important information is that 80% of that nerve is afferent. It's actually coming from our viscera back up to the brains. So we see something that really gut wrenches. And then that sends a message back up to the brain that's saying life threat. So after just seeing somebody injured, we may be laying in our bed to go to sleep, and all of a sudden we see those images and our guts start to twist. So until that information from our guts changes, our guts will continue to tell and to amplify and to tell the brain that there is threat and that the world is a dangerous place, a life-threatening place even. So I was experimenting with finding different ways to get a new message from the gut that would contradict those of overwhelming helplessness. And I came across this sound, voo, and I had people make that, and we'll do that as an exercise if you wish, any of you wish, but please don't feel compelled that you have to do it. And often it brings up very pleasant sensations, deep sensations of warmth or relaxation, but it can also bring up troubling sensations or feelings. But again, if we give ourselves that self-hug exercise, then we can usually just meet those sensations in a careful way. So the idea is making the sound voo coming from the belly. So the idea, and I'll demonstrate it and then you can do it, is to take an easy, full breath, and on the exhalation, make the sound voo coming from the belly, and letting the sound and the breath go all the way out, and then just waiting, allowing a new breath, the new breath to come in, filling our best belly, filling our best belly, filling our belly, and then our chest, and then repeating. So here I'll demonstrate. So when I'm really feeling the vibration here in my belly, when I let the breath and the sound all the way out, and let the breath come in, filling belly and chest, and then again. So shall we do that? Those of you who wish. And just noticing sensations, feelings, thoughts, images, and just take note. And maybe in the chat, you might want to just say something briefly of what you're experiencing. Can we do that, Mike and Owen?
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's just do that, right? Yeah. Feeling safer. Memories of fear. I visited in a jungle in India. Yeah. But I could hold it. I feel relaxation, vibration in my center. I'm experiencing calmness. Euphoric tingling through the center. Something, warmth. So hands and face tingling. Coughing. And that also can be a form actually of discharge. Tingling in my hands. So again, these are often sensations of enlivening, peacefulness, decompress my belly in a deep way, and a sense of relaxation. So again, you see many, many things happen again just doing this exercise, which lasted for just a few minutes, or barely a few minutes. And it can really shift our physiology, which shifts our whole perception, our feeling of ourselves, and relative safety in our environment, and relative safety with the person we share a life with, we choose to share a life with. So again, these are very simple exercises that really allow body awareness and connection with our intuitive self, our primal sense of self, of our true self, or our real self, of who we are, who we were before trauma, and who we are after trauma.
Thanks, Peter. You do that really wonderful exercise with Ray, the war veteran, who came back from war with PTSD, with Tourette syndromes. He had survived 2 IED explosions. And to see, I posted a link in the chat, guys, with Peter working with him. But to see his transformation over just a few sessions with Peter, to go from a place of really severe chronic pain in his body and PTSD to a place of vitality where he can actually see and look ahead at his future. Maureen Gallagher, my teacher in Somatic Experiencing, I'm not sure if she got this quote from you, but she says that trauma is stuck vitality, right? And so when we can start to become aware of the things that are holding us back, maybe the places in our lives that were frozen, and we can do some work around it in a slow, gentle way, and with a practitioner, with someone who can guide you in this experience to practice that safety, that co-regulation, we can bring energy back into our body, and we can bring ourselves back to a place of vitality. Do you want to say anything about that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, that's really unpacking. You know, people have asked me, what's the goal of a session? Or how do you know a session is completed? And the simple example I would give is that the person feels more alive, more real, more vital. When people are experiencing some of these sensations, like the ones that people were reporting, like tingling, vibration, warmth, spreading warmth, I might suggest they say the following sentence just to be curious about what happens. And the sentence is, let's see, what is it? Oh, I'm alive. I'm real. I'm alive. And to notice with many people, the sensations deepen, they increase and they deepen. With other people, it brings up times when they didn't feel that way. But again, it brings up the grist for the mill. That's something that we can work with. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's really
Owen,
unpacking. That would be a good word for it. Unpacking, and then repackaging and being there. Oh, okay. Melissa was saying if you go to the website Somatic Experiencing one word.com, you can link to that session with Ray, and also how he then is able to come on in. This is what I was saying, that the people are going to start coming in here. So there's only one right now. So where was I?
you're talking about Ray's story.
Oh, yes. So that, and also books and talks I've given, they're all there. And also there's a link to the traumahealing.org website, which is the nonprofit that I founded for the responsibility of bringing this world out into the work into the world. So so anyhow, you can link with that, and also with, as I said, with talks I've given and with different books. They're all listed there. So just
Awesome.
mention that. Yeah, somaticexperiencing.com. Yeah.
So we have a couple of minutes here for some questions. And so if you have any questions that are coming up for you, we probably can't get to all of them, but go ahead and put that into the chat here. There was a question from Michael Tennant. Peter, you know, many of us here, because we are men's emotional leadership development, we have a large audience of men. Do you see yourself working differently with men than you do with women?
Interesting. Not, I mean, of course, in some ways, but not really, not fundamentally. You know, I consult with a addiction trauma center called the Meadows. And one of the groups I've met with and worked with is a group of men with sexual compulsivity. And when I work with them, it's really amazing how they care for each other and how they support each other. So if somebody sometimes I'll work with somebody in that group setting, and rather than jumping up and saying that what they want, they'll often say, no, one of their friends, one of their colleagues is really in a place where they need some attention, need some help. So I believe that women, of course, have learned to support each other, probably since the time of Lilith, Adam and Eve, Adam's first wife, Lilith. But now I see this as, I don't know if we're catching up, but I think we're making decisions to be more sensory and feeling oriented. And that, again, this is something that we can give to our friends, to our partners. Again, the Motown song, takes one to stand in the dark alone, takes two to let the light shine through. And I think it's really important about being there and being there with others.
Yeah, great. This is a really great question here. Maybe both you and Owen can expand on this. Can you explain the concept that trauma is held in the body and not in the mind?
Well, I think I tried to answer that. I mean, it's in both. It's in the mind and the psyche and the spirit, but fundamentally it's in the body. And the way to shift it, you know, if it's in the brain, you're not going to drill holes and put electrodes in the brain. But that feedback, remember that nerve, 80% sensory afferent. So it's taking all the sense from our guts, from our viscera, from our hearts, from our lungs, and relaying it to the brain. And until that shifts, then we're stuck in the trauma. So
Yeah, and I would just add that as men, we tend to be more physical. So men are more, I think, willing to go to their somatic experience and their emotional experience, which gets them feeling their body. And once they start to feel their body, then it starts to be safe and almost natural to feel the emotions.
yes, exactly. Feels, yes, exactly. Somebody mentioned, I think, about the work of Rick Schwartz, Internal Family Systems. He's a good friend, colleague, and it's also very good work, very useful work for integrating these different parts of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, great. Let's see here. This is a really interesting question. Peter, you briefly touched about spirituality at the top of this call, but Danilo asked, what is the connection between regulation of the nervous system and spirituality?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's the topic of a book that I'm working on right now with a colleague from Denmark, from Copenhagen. And this book is called Trauma and Spirituality, Resilience in the Human Spirit. There's an integral relationship. I think some of you even reported when you talked about these sensations and feelings of warmth. Those are, in a way, those are also spiritual experiences. To feel alive, to feel alive. To me, that's at the root of almost all spirituality. And when we transform our traumas, when we move through our traumas, I think we come to that knowing, to that vitality, to our fundamental aliveness in a body, in a sensing, knowing body.
Mm.
I just want to emphasize that because so much of what we're first exposed to with spirituality is a more of a cognitive experience. But
Yeah.
when we have that somatic experience, it is vital and so much richer. But we often don't have processes or spaces to have that kind of spiritual experience that is more somatic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Again, if it's not rooted in the body, again, going back to that Papua New Guinea saying that if knowledge doesn't exist in the body, then it doesn't exist. And that's some very simple. Also, there was a Sufi saying that the body is the shore on the ocean of being. Yeah, and
Mhm.
yeah, I talk a bit different ways of looking at that in the autobiography. Yeah, it's a very important question, very, very important question. Of course, that brings up the whole question of psychedelics, which I also tried to address in the autobiography, in the book.
Yeah. What I've often heard or hear, psychedelics are like this holotropic, which is like bringing back to whole, right? And when I think about spirituality, and when you talk about this often, when we are in places of danger or freeze, we always get disconnected from these parts of ourselves. And practicing coming back to whole is bringing back these parts into us. Michael Affronti was just saying, like, there are no bad parts. And we're talking about IFS here just a little bit, right? There are no bad parts, but there's something within us that feels afraid of some of these parts and we disconnect from it.
We
And
disown them.
oftentimes
We
we
disown them.
disown them, right? We disown them. And a lot of this, what's beautiful about somatic work and also integrating IFS work into this is that we get to see these different parts and then bring them back in and we get to honor them and be with it. Here's one more for you, Peter. If you are a survivor of repetitive physical abuse with a support system and cannot differentiate between who is safe and who isn't safe, how do you begin to feel safe at all?
Well, I think that's where we have to bring in co-regulation.
Yeah.
And then from that comes that sense of safety, or safety enough to explore what's going on in our internal experience.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, everyone, please go buy an autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey. It is out there right now.
Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us on this call. Go check out Melissa had posted all of his work in the chat box. We are launching our own program, a 4-week somatic program for men. It is called CORE. I'm teaching that program. It starts next month. We're going to put Duncan just added the link there. And if you want to schedule a call with me to see if you're a right fit, please schedule a call with me. Peter, thank you again for your time. And thank you.
Okay, nice being with you. Nice reconnecting with you.
Yes, Peter, after all these decades.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Okay. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And everyone that's still on the call, thank you so much for joining us. We're Men's Emotional Leadership Development. So please, I know all of you know men, and I know many of you know men that would benefit from work like this. Please send them over to us, sign up for our newsletter, and keep an eye out for in-person retreats that we do throughout the year. Sending you all so much big, big love, and take a few deep breaths today, get into your body, and we'll see you around. Also in July, we have a great honor of hosting Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory. And so if you are really fascinated about this work and you want to expand your knowledge around the body and also stress, please come check us out. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll keep you updated on there. Sending you all so much love. Thank you all so much for joining us again, and have a wonderful day.